So we are ultimately looking at three great decisions that we have to make in order to be able to create a channel. So we talked about the three chapters, the basics. These next two chapters are so important that we're going to study them and test them by themselves because they involve three questions. First is, and this is chapter 4. This is channel intensity. And the third is talk about how many outlets is for your channel. And then you'll talk about the different types of channels, including dual distribution, which is what Broyhill does when they sell through retailers and then have a factory store. So these are the three build channels: make or buy, channel intensity, and the channel type. So, any of you going or seriously considering getting your MBA? Okay, so one of the big questions when you get your MBA, one of the things you're really going to get pounded on is the need to understand you do better than anyone else. And that's the one thing that you focus on in business to the exclusion of all else. And so that core competency, that uniqueness that you have is the only thing your business should be delivering, and everything else you rent out to. That's an MBA kind of evaluation, okay? And in its truest sense, that is the place when you're building a chair, vision you horizontal, right? And in the traditional structure, to make sure I out my intermediate and they'll sell to users. This is what's called horizontal. Horizontal structure. This is the channel system is in unique enough. So, reason, purpose, user make their channel decisions on their body. So that's your traditional structure. The make decision basically says from pillar to post, we will own all of the channels from beginning to end to the end user. Right. Beginning to end. And so here's our decision to make or buy. And so this is a horizontal structure with lines drawn in the middle. This is a vertical structure, except to the. All right. So So vertical integration, the make decision, is when one organization does all the work. Vertical integration can come from both directions. It can be a manufacturer who decides they want to take over the entire distribution function and go forward or downstream. Or it could be a distributor or a retailer who decides to produce their own branded product. And that would be upstream. And so an example of that is, I would think of, has anyone been to Aldi, by the way, here? So that's what an Aldi basically is. It's a vertical integration from the bottom up. If you notice, when you go into an Aldi, there's the majority of goods that are sold in an Aldi are the store goods. And they find that particular environment, it does quite well. And so Aldi would be an example of an upstream. Now, you really, really have to have good reasons to make, because basically the odds are not favorable. What are the difficulties of going from the buy decision to the make? Well, the first is all of the costs become yours. All of the costs, all of the responsibilities. And it also means that if you're in strategic steps, machines has been nearly 100 years, and it used to be international business machines, calculators, and all the other things. The major wave is in 1967 when Tom Watson didn't create, but introduced the System 36. The world changed dramatically from there. Even small corporations in a regional sense, maybe 100 people as employees, could afford a System 36. And computing made a major leap. Coming to 2009, 2010, IBM is not fairly sure that their core business anymore, because the truth is we're not out there to build machines, we're out there to satisfy customers. And customers had shifted dramatically from 1967 to 2009. For one thing, Bode's Law has kicked in. Anybody got an idea what Bode's Law says? Every 2 years, our computation abilities in CPUs double, and that has held consistent ridiculously over the last 40 years. Just think about computation. So anyway, it also meant that being able to have a machine that do all of my functions for the next 10 years has been thrown out. Concept. I may need to have machines every 2 years or 3 years. All right. And so what happens is the product fades away in the background, and the real value that you deliver to consumers suddenly comes to front, right? So what do you give them? You provide them with solutions to their systems. You give them consistency over the years, and you give them a pathway upgrade. And because that became the mission of IBM, you saw a shift in channels. It's not just something you can simply take on, but it has to take over the entire organization. And so outsourcing, is inexpensive. It is the fastest way of doing business, but depending on your situations, it's not the best one. Let me give you just a couple final thoughts about this. The decision to decide whether or not to go from buy to make, channel function to channel function. All of the channel functions have to be bettered in some way or another by making a shift like this. Think about if you're an upstream provider and all of a sudden you're telling your partners downstream, no thanks, we're going to take over your business now. I mean, that's the kind of thing that could happen from the situation. So you're not going to make any friends along the way. Just think also that place is the most expensive of the four P's. Anyway, going on. Five decisions you have to come up with a decision to make. Okay. So, as I showed you before, this is the traditional horizontal structure. Each organization is separate, independent, and that's where we started. This is what a vertical structure is when you're looking at just one single corporation all the way to the consumer. Apple is kind of interesting because Apple has kind of a dual distribution. They have a vertical market and they also have a horizontal structure. Yes. Yes, that's correct. Any corporation that has any home brands, for lack of a better word, would be considered dual structure. You find that brand merchandise is really vitally important because the margins on them are so much bigger and it gives you a chance to build this unique idea of who you are. And so Walmart's gone through, I think 2 or 3 permutations of their own brands. So, and that's what Sam's Choice has come for all those years. Now, a true absolute vertical market is realize that there's so many permutations in the middle, especially when you have organizations that are strong and the disadvantages are no disadvantages at all. Jerry Jones used to say, I never worried about a profit. All right. Well, a corporate like Walmart or those organizations have none of these issues and they can do both. So this is kind of the way, if we were to look at streams, how you can kind of think of versus make, right? So just in money and responsibilities, is the responsibility. Completely on the other side, you do everything, it's your money, it's your risk, it's your responsibility, but it's also all your gain too. And so the decision, like anything, can account to a risk, but it can also amount to an opportunity as well. Where the truth is somewhere in the murky middle, this is where we actually are. In what's called a governance kind of mode, where if you're going to look at Wall, there is this separation, there is kind of a governing structure based upon their own traditional and norms. They work together because the desire is to create something good. And so it kind of gravitates back and forth between the two of them. And so relational governments and compromise in which channels in truth have properties of the owned and body. And so if you're looking at such as the Walmart, there's no perfect, there's no perfect on either side. It is good to think easier. Keep those two ideas of buy or make, buy or make. I start at buy position, and I have to come up with a logical reason to go to the make position. And or just remember, they're not binary, not only make, not only. And so, as I said before, you have to justify going into the make position by every function within the channel. And so these are the kind of ones that give you an idea. So the classic market done where the manufacturer has a representative who calls upon the independent wholesaler. The independent wholesaler basically has a series of retail groups, independent third parties that could monitor. The independent wholesaler is the one that distributes the products to those smaller stores. Classic horizontal, each organization, and the vertical organization, their sales force, who basically distributes, distribution is an arm of the producer, maybe no wholesaler whatsoever. You may have something like that. But then finally you go to a store. So I'll say this about Apple. Apple is one of those corporations that does the same thing. So you can buy certain things of Apple, the iPads and the iPhones and the watches at your average Walmart. But if you're going to the MacBook Pros or any of the heavy duty stuff, you have to either be at a university like this, or you have to go to like one of the Apples. By the way, the Apples, see, that's true. The Apple stores have the highest profit per square inch of any store in the world. And that includes diamond merchants. Give you an idea of the power that Apple has. But then you actually find this middle where everybody basically, you might have an exclusive sales agent, not. You do distribution as a joint venture. You see that this is true also with FedEx. FedEx had something like 7,000 independent carriers that they do second mile and last mile work with. And so you have these joint ventures. And then finally, an example could be like a franchise store. And we'll talk about franchises are very unique. It's not an American idea, but the Americans love it. We found a way to make it work. And basically what it is two unique organizations with one organization that has a deliberate loss of identity just so they could take over the concept of the corporation. So anyway. So what are the pros and cons? What are the costs and benefits of the make and buy channels? Well, just like every well, what's the big benefit of make decision? Well, if the control is beneficial and the managers can and the product or their service requires or demands control, then that's the first make decision. I've got a unique product or opportunity, a unique special. This distribution costs, and the difficulty with that is that that's not their business. They're not used to doing these things, and it's very easy to underestimate costs. It's a world. It's a waking up when the first day you open your business and you realize how expensive things can be, because very often underestimate cost. And certainly the fee place is the most expensive. And sometimes it's an eye-opening thing. It's an amazing thing to suddenly realize just how difficult it is to get. But having said so, many organizations move that way. So I alluded a little Here's basically how it breaks down. If IBM sells 100 or hundreds of machines every year, that's great. But the difficulty with that is how do we plan that in terms of stable profits over a period of years? So that's the first thing to think. So they've experienced 50 years of growth, and they've watched the market move in many, many different directions, to the point now where even the hardware and software frame is constantly evolving over the 3 or 4 years. And perhaps even consumers have complained of the fact that I'm stuck with a machine that's going to be here when I should be moving on. So what IBM did was they restructured their business. Instead of owning, now they're doing a great deal of leasing, which means that if there's a major system upgrade, it's IBM owns it, so they automatically come in and do it. They also started selling service. And so what happens is instead of this being your profits as you sell machines, this is your profit as you're selling service. Does in that is that it gives contracts to their end users, but it also gave them a pathway of upgrading that they didn't even have to think of. So this is a situation, win-win. And of course, IBM has deep pockets, so they can reach in and do all of this. The difficulty is that they made, once again, they made, I guess you could say enemies. Certainly there were companies that were doing these things that were working with IBM, and IBM, of course, came in and said, well, we're going to be part of the business. We're not going to move you out. We're just going to say we're IBM. No, not moving. It's amazing the organizations that have stuck around. So Jack Henry is a banking software system in Monett, Missouri. I went, and they have stuck around as a banking software, and IBM can't move them because if you know anything about banking, I was in banking for 7 years, you need your relationships to get through. And so they're happy with them, and I think the whole banking industry is. The difficulty, of course, is that vertical integration is harder than it looks. And so this was a German insurance company that acquired an investment bank. And this is also one of those difficulties when it comes to culture clash within the organization. The focus of these two organizations is entirely different. One is an insurance company and the other is an investment bank. I've been in conversations between bankers and insurers, and they have entirely different from each other, because the banker is putting your money in insurance, put your money in a bank, all right? And the insurance say, you don't know what can happen in the future, you think you have enough, maybe you don't. So anyway, I could see where this never was going to work in the beginning. Okay, so how do we buy to get into the buy channel? What are our abilities to compensate our channel members to give them a reason to stick? It depends a lot on whether you're an established corporation or whether you're up and coming. Up and coming corporations, I can tell you this is the biggest struggle you have, especially this. If you're a new business, you have to prove that you can stay in business. And so where you have three normal kinds of ways of compensation, you also have other variations based upon the iffiness of the organizations. And so these are the three most common. So how do you pay for it? All right. The three most common are margin, commission, and royalty. And this is the difference between the reseller price and the cost of goods sold. Margin. And margin drips all the way down the channels if you think about it. Total cost of goods sold, direct and indirect for this good is $100. I'm selling it for $150. The margin is $50. Usually it's expressed in a percentage. So this would be 33%. So anyway, the next is commission. And this is usually some fraction of the resale price. The other direction, it doesn't take into account cost of goods sold. It just says, I'm going to take 3% of every transaction you're doing, and I just described credit. Why I'm still kind of a fan of cash. You know, if I give someone $50, I gave them $50. If I give it to them in a transaction, somebody else is percent. The last is royalty. And this is the percentage of the business. So you would own. Usually royalties are expected first. Now, there are other variations depending on how iffy your organization is. So the first is a lump sum or a flat fee. You've got to put $500 down and you can draw that on account. The next is called a functional discount. And this is when the manufacturer is reimbursed for just expenses. So in other words, you're basically, all you're doing is trying to take care of costs. It kind of creates a moral hazard. Think about it, because you're giving a functional discount perhaps to one organization, and why aren't other organizations open to that? So once again, one of those propositions. And the other is future consideration, which is basically some part of the business of that corporation. If you survive for the next 6 months, for the next 6 years, I demand to be able to ship 40% of your product. That would be future consideration. And of course, the big difficulty with that is, what if tomorrow never comes? And so that's the difficulty with future consideration. That future business may never materialize. But in the buy situation, these are the things that we have to give in order to get what we wish. Now, the advantage of several of these are that these are, in essence, if we remember finance, if they're net 30. So it means that we get sometimes a float to be able to use that money for 2 to 30 days and whatever we wish. If the disadvantage is not your money to play around with. All right, we're going to stop there. I've got a few things I have to do. We'll come back on Wednesday and we will finish this chapter and we'll start maybe. Have a good day. You're welcome.